All right. Luke 14. And turn to Luke 14. We're going to go 25 through 35. It's going to be the majority of our talk this afternoon. Now, the first part of this, we had talked about this last time, right before this, a couple of verses up from this. Jesus says one of those, he was eating dinner. Remember, he was eating supper with the Pharisee on the Sabbath. And he says, one of those who was reclined at table with him heard these things and said, "Blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God," which of course is true, absolutely accurate. But Jesus said to him, "A man once gave a great banquet and invited many." He goes through this. They all began to make excuses. "I bought a field. I bought 5 yoke of oxen. I've married a wife." And he goes through these things. And he says, "Please give my excuses." And remember, that's what they are. They're excuses. So they've been invited to this banquet, and the master has made preparation for them to come to this banquet, and now they're making excuses as to why you can't go. Now, what's the parallel here? Who's the parallel to? The Jews, right? Called to the kingdom. In fact, the kingdom came through the Jews. All right? So the Jews were called to the kingdom, and now what are they doing? They're making excuses. Now, they weren't, in their minds, they're not doing that. They look at it as a falsehood that he's speaking, but that's essentially what it is. They're giving all of these reasons why they're not going to do. But we have our hope through Moses. We're sons of Abraham. He says, absolutely. But remember what Abraham and Moses, remember what their purpose was. And now they're making excuses as to why they're not going to avail themselves of this kingdom that's been promised and has come through them. So that leads us into this. Here it is that many people, let's say many, but all are called to discipleship. All are called to discipleship. Everybody in the world is called to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. They're called to do so. Now they choose not to, and that's on them. That's their prerogative, but it's also to their eternal regret. Okay. Now we're going to shift gears after verse 24. Let's look at verse 25. Here, all are called to discipleship. Now remember, there's a cost to discipleship, and in fact, you might see that as your subject heading. Yeah, I don't know. My translation has that cost of discipleship or price of discipleship right above verse 25. Okay. All right, so now, after this dinner is over, he's proclaimed these words to at the Pharisee's house. Now great crowds accompanied him, and he turned around and said to them, he's giving them a warning. All right, he's making sure that you do. I think everything we do, we should have all of the facts available to us. We should be completely informed before we're asked to do anything. I think that's a good idea. All right, very rarely will I do something unless I have pretty much all of the facts. Unless I know the terms of the agreement, I'm not going to sign a contract with someone. That just makes perfect sense. I'm not going to. Well, let's just put it this way: you want to know as much truth and information before you can make an informed decision. So Jesus is turning around and he's going to confront these people who are following him, because remember, a lot of them are following because he's speaking great words and they're touched by the words. But he says, now before you hear these things that are coming from me, but before you decide that you're going to follow me, think about it. There's going to be a cost involved. Look what he says. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. And that's pretty strong language, isn't it? Now, again, we get to the idea of the word hate. And it does not mean what we think it means in the terms of the English language. When we think hate, we think despise, abhor, reject altogether. That's not what hate means in this context. And it's not even the word that we translate as that, meaning that kind of language. What it means is, unless you can put God above all of it, unless you can subjugate every one of those other things to me, then what? He cannot be my disciple. All right. So the idea of hating, because here it's asking us to hate our own lives. God doesn't want us to hate ourselves. If we hate ourselves, would we want to go to heaven? If we hate ourselves, are we going to want to go to heaven? Are we going to want what's best for ourselves if we hate ourselves? No, we seek out misery when we hate ourselves. So it cannot mean what we think it means in regards to the word hate, but it does mean that everything else in our lives has to take second place or third place or fifth place or whatever. The desire to follow Christ must be at the forefront of everything, because he says, and let's look at another way of speaking these things. All right, and yes, even his own life, unless he hate his father and mother and wife and children, brothers and sisters, and even hate his own life. Now, what other way can we phrase that to make it a little bit easier to understand? Rather than hate our own life, what is it? What can we think of? How else could we say that would make it better, maybe more easily understood by other people, or more palatable? Let's say, sweeten it a little bit. Huh? I don't know. Okay. I recognize that I subjugate myself to God. Anything that might keep me from God I reject. I get rid of. Okay?
Well, I think about William a lot.
That's good.
Well, his parents did not like him becoming a member of the church.
Right.
But he didn't hate his mother and father the
Sure.
way we think hate is.
Yeah,
Of course,
right.
he still loved them, but he put his own salvation
Sure.
in front of his parents.
Their attitude towards his salvation did not affect his salvation. He didn't allow it to keep him from doing what it is. Okay, that makes that certainly makes sense. Absolutely. And look what were you going to say something? Okay. look at what he says. Look at what he tells him to do. Hate his father and mother. Okay, you didn't hate your father and mother, but you weren't going to keep them from letting you become a Christian. They weren't going to stop you from doing what you. Okay, so father and mother, and that takes place when you're still living under the home, right? Then let's look at once we get out of the house. All right, and wife and children. Oh, okay. So how many times have you heard of someone who became a New Testament Christian? They're the only one in their household. They're the only one in the house that's a member of the church. The husband or wife is not only not a Christian, but is opposed to them being a Christian. They're actively opposed to the church. Or the children. It's not as often, because 9 times out of 10, it starts with the children and works its way through the rest of the family. I found, and this is completely separate, but I just found this interesting, and I saw this statistic the other day, and it was put out by some people within the church, and I'm trying to remember who did it, but it was talking about households that are saved, households that are converted. And it said that if the child is converted, the rest of the family has, it's like not much, it's like 5% chance of the rest of the family being converted. If the mother is converted, it's like a 55 to 60% chance of the household being converted. If the husband or father is converted first, it's like a 96% chance of the rest of the household being converted. I thought that was very interesting. It still tells us that fathers still have a great deal of influence within the world we live. Like I said, that's a completely separate thing. But here he's saying, if you have to regard them less in order to be my disciple. Now he's not saying that in order to become a disciple, but if you put their opinion or value their authority more than my authority, then it's going to be very difficult to be a disciple of Christ, isn't it? It's going to be really hard to be a disciple of Christ if you allow your husband or wife or mother or father or your children or your brothers and sisters, if you allow them to color that, to affect that, it's going to be very difficult to be a follower. Okay? You still love them. You still even live in the same house with them. But if you allow them to color your attitude towards Christ, then you can't be a disciple. It's going to be, if not physically impossible, it's going to be very difficult spiritually to remain faithful. Because and I've seen, all of us have seen cases or instances where that's the case, where someone is a Christian and they allow their family or whomever to pull them away. But again, this is the cost of discipleship. There's a cost to it. And, Again, we need to be fully aware of the cost before we can go into it with an open mind and understand. But he continues on. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. So there's two instances. Number one, if you do not hate or disregard or regard less other people in your life over your salvation, then you can't be my disciple. Here he says, whoever does not bear his own cross and follow after me cannot be my disciple. Now, this is an interesting thing about the idea of bear their own cross. What does that mean?
He hasn't done it yet, which might have made it a little hard for them to understand.
Okay. Let's think about this. When he says bear his own cross, remember, this is interesting because this is before the crucifixion, right? So here he's making mention of a cross, and you can imagine a lot of these folks are, what are you talking about? Bear your own cross. We've never seen you bear a cross. How can I bear my own cross? And what does it mean to bear my cross and follow you? What are you going to do? How does this work? But we think about this, and this is the interesting thing, because this is how the Bible is, the words that are spoken in it are so, it's prescient. It's talking about something that's going to happen in the future. So when Jesus is forced to bear his own cross and go to Calvary, he's saying that if you're going to be my disciple, you can't be my disciple only when things are good, and only when I'm providing all of this food, and only when I'm healing the sick, and only when I'm doing casting out demons and all these things. It also means that when I take my cross and I hoist it on my back and I walk towards Calvary's hill, you have to be willing to pick your own cross up and follow right after me. You follow me no matter where it goes. It may cost you your own life, but that's where you go. It doesn't change. It's not a fair weather discipleship. Christianity is not a fair weather discipleship. So when it comes time, and we're very close to the crucifixion. So when he pulls that cross up and he puts it on his own back and he walks towards Calvary, his followers better be ready to do the exact same thing. Now, the interesting thing is he says, I don't expect you to be crucified for me. He said, I'm going to do that for you. But you have to at least be willing to pick up your cross and follow me to that point. Now, I'll take your place on the cross, but you have to be willing to pick up your cross and go with me at least to that point. That's the very least you could do. You can't do it all. Now, I'll be happy to climb up on that cross for your sake and in your place, but you still have to carry your cross to that point. Go with me until the end until you can go no further, and then I'll carry you the rest of the way. So you have to go with me to the hill, and then from that point I'll take it from there. But again, I think a lot of times there are people who become. Do you think there are people who become New Testament Christians that don't really have a true sense of what it means to be a Christian? They don't know really what it's going to cost them. I'm not saying that we get people in and say, okay, I know you want to be a Christian. We're so glad about this, and we can't wait for you to go down to that water and come up a new creature. But before you do, remember this. We don't want to talk people out of becoming a Christian, but they do need to know that it may not be easy for them. It's not always going to be, you come up out of that water and you're so excited and you're so happy and you're just overjoyed at everything, and then the reality of being a Christian just kind of sets in. You realize that, okay, there's a cost to this. Part of it is personal cost. I can't keep doing the things I like to do. I can't get drunk pass out drunk every weekend. I can't fool around with girls or guys. I can't engage in all of this kind of behavior that I used to engage in. That's part of the cost of discipleship. And a lot of people, once they realize that cost, they count the cost and they say, man, it's not worth it. They go right back into the world. All right. Now, we can't, it's hard for us to conceive of that, but there are people who do just that, aren't there? All right. So he says this, he says, unless you bear your own cross and you come after me, you follow me to the point of death, I'll die for you, but you have to follow me to that point. For which of you, and here he gives it, of course, he always gives this example, right? He's going to give them this parable. For which of you desiring to build a tower does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Now, we think about the idea of a tower, we're thinking like the skyscraper. That's not really what it is. This is the idea of a tower that you would, a watchtower, okay? You put it up, you had your little land holdings, and you put this tower up so that you could watch out for people who might try to come in and do you harm. And you'd have a man that would sit up in that watchtower, and he would watch over the flocks, and he would watch over the vineyards and all of this, and he would sound the alarm, which says, you're getting ready to do this, and he says, which one of you does it first? Before you do that, figure out what it's going to take to do it. How much, how many people you're going to have, how much it's going to cost, where you're going to get the materials from. You figure all of that out. Or else, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Now, I find that very interesting because you could think about that in a spiritual capacity, can't you? The idea of how many do you think that there are people in the world when their friend comes out of their lifestyle and goes and says, oh yeah, I've changed. I'm a Christian now. I don't do that. And then all of a sudden when they go back into the world, all of those people begin to do what? They make fun of him. They mock him for not, oh yeah, the big Christian. Yeah, look where you are right now. You're right back here with us. Never thought about that. Never thought about that until I read this verse, and I thought, that's the truth. So many people, when they become a Christian, they kind of have a little bit of pride in it, and they, oh no, I don't do that anymore. I don't drink anymore. I don't do drugs anymore. I don't sleep around anymore. I don't do all of these kind of things, and they began to look to the people that they used to be with as self-righteous and haughty. And then, when the temptations come and they decide, this isn't for me, and then they go right back into the world, what happens? Never thought about it, but here it is. I mean, he gives a true account. This is something that would happen. All right. He said, or what king going out to encounter another king in war will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 to meet against him, or to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, now here's the thing: it may be possible for someone with 10,000 to meet someone with 20,000. It depends on the 20,000, right? If they're absolutely incompetent, and they're just villagers with pitchforks, and you've got the guy with 10,000 and he's got experienced fighters, yeah, 10,000 may be able to beat a contingency of 20. But if not, while the other is still a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. All right. In other words, anything that might keep you from being my disciple, if you don't get rid of it, you can't be my disciple. And it means literally you can't. You just simply can't do it. It's not within you to do it if you can't get rid of the things that might prevent you from being my disciple. That makes perfect sense, right? It'd be very difficult to kick a smoking habit if you're not willing to kick a smoking habit. You got to be willing to give up the cigarettes if you're going to kick a smoking habit. All right? It's very, very difficult, for example, to get into shape if you're not willing to maybe watch your diet and maybe do a little exercise every so often. You got to think about what it's going to take to get where we want to be. So he says, so not only do we have all are called to fellowship, but there's a cost. A fellowship, or discipleship, sorry. All right? And that cost is anything, and I mean that truthfully, anything that keeps us away. I'll do that. Got to give up anything, no matter what it is. And for a lot of people, that's the step too far. That's the step too far. Cannot go that far. You got people that will say, I'll pick up my cross and Lord, I'll follow you. I'll follow you and I'll follow you. And Jesus is still walking. We finally go, it's just too much. I'm putting down my cross. I'm going back home. It's just too much for me to do. And again, he said, unless you're willing to do it, pick it up and follow me all the way, then you can't be my disciple. All right? So there's a call to fellowship or discipleship, a call to discipleship, and then there's a cost of discipleship. And both of those need to be abundantly clear to everyone who might consider being a disciple of Jesus Christ. All right? Anybody got anything they want to add to that?
You say everything also that keeps us away?
Sure, anything and everything. Anything and everything, whatever it is. And for some people, it's going to be different. So, some people they're not going to have to give up that much. It's not going to make a huge change in their lifestyle. I've always believed in God. I just was doing it wrong. My worship was wrong, and my relationship was wrong because I wasn't truly in a relationship. But by and large, It's not going to take that much. But everybody's going to have to give up something. It might be a deeply held belief. That's a cost. I've always believed that, once you're saved, you never lose your salvation. So it wasn't a big deal if you would do this, that, and the other. Now I know I can lose my salvation. So I'm going to have to give up some things. I'm going to give up this long-held belief that I can do anything I want to as a Christian. I got to give that up. Not only the things I was doing, but that belief that I had. So yeah, we're all going to have something. Something's going to cost us something. It's not much of a discipleship if it doesn't cost us something. Everything that's worth something is going to cost us something. All right? And, part of it is the idea that we have to be willing to go all the way to the end rather than, as long as we feel comfortable. Because he's saying, you got to go with me all the way to the hill. You can't stop halfway there. You can't complain that the load is too heavy and everything else that people want to complain about when it comes to being a disciple of Jesus. And it's interesting what people consider to be just a step too far. Can't do it.
And the longer you are, I think the easier it is, actually.
Well, think about this. I'll give you an example. And I read this, and this has been a long time ago. There was a young guy, and he was probably in some Eastern European country, because it seems like where they all are. This guy was able to pick up a full-grown steer. I was like, wow. Well, the way he's able to do that is he would go out every day. When he was a young guy, he would go out and he would pick up this newborn calf. And he would do every day. And every day he would go out there and do that. So every day that calf would grow a little bit bigger, and he was able to pick up that thing. But how did he do it? See, if he had left off for a week and come back a week later, you ever seen how big does a calf grow? Quickly. When they're drinking milk and then they start eating, man, they grow quick. So if he had left off for a couple of weeks, he wouldn't have been able to do it. But he went out every day and did that. And then, I'm not saying everybody could do this physical thing, but he was able to pick up a full-grown steer. Now, that's incredible. But it was only because he became used to it and it became a part of his daily routine. Well, that's the same thing with being a disciple. It gets easier. Of course it does. And I think it makes it easier when we get older, that when bad things happen, we have a better viewpoint, don't we? When you're young, we tend to be a little bit more, everything is a big deal. And everything is, you look at high schoolers, right? When they're in love with each other, everything is just this big deal, and it just grand gestures, and they just don't have the wisdom to know that, hey, just because this didn't work out doesn't mean that it's not the end of the world. You'll probably find somebody else, and it probably wasn't going to happen anyway. But that's the youth. That's the impetuousness of youth. When we get a little older, we tend to have a little bit more of a mature and level-headed viewpoint of looking at things. It's funny because Peyton come in and she'll say, she's so funny, because she'll come in and she'll say, I just don't know if I can deal with this drama anymore. And it's like, what drama? She said, the kids at school, and some kid will be going out, and then none of them can go out with anything. They can't do they can't even leave their house without mom and dad. But they're dating, and they're like, okay, how are they dating? Well, they're just dating at school, okay. But she talks about all of this drama, and if something goes wrong, it is literally the end of the world. It will never get better, and it can only get worse, and it's just the most horrible thing in the world. And she comes in, she just shakes her head. She said, these people are crazy. But again, that's young people. Yeah, she may be. Hopefully, she'll be maybe one of those kids that's not like that, but probably not. But as we get older, it does get easier, and it gets much easier to be a disciple. Continue to be a disciple, because we've seen it. We got wisdom, and we look at it.
Train other folks. Don't
Sure.
There with me.
Sure. It tells older women to instruct, to teach younger women, and that's a huge thing. I don't think we maybe think of that as important as it is, but we're told to do that. Older men are to teach and instruct younger men. We're told to do that. It's not if it becomes a convenient type of thing, it's, no, you need to do this, okay? As an older man, especially as an older Christian man, you're going to show this younger Christian man how to deal with issues at home, how to deal with issues at work, how to do all of these things. older women, they take the younger women and they say, listen, I know it sounds terrible, but this is something that we can learn from and we can make better. And so it makes a big difference. And that's part of being that mature, older Christian. We need them. And we need them to actively work in the church to do that kind of thing so that we don't have some of the issues that we're seeing today. You know, you used to never hear about divorce within the Lord's church. It just didn't happen. Or it did, but it was somewhere else. But how many people do you know in the church that are divorced, but it's not even for scriptural reasons? And they're divorced, and the church, unfortunately, rather than saying, mourning over that kind of thing, sort of, well, you know, it will stretch that reason that they divorced to include what they've done, rather than look at what the scriptures say. And then again, it gets back to the idea of older people need to be taking the reins into something like that. All right, so let's go to John chapter 11. Anybody got anything they want to add to this? All right, call to discipleship and a cost of discipleship. Both of those need to be understood by people if they want to have a real picture about what it means to be a Christian. Absolutely. All right, so John chapter 11, and this is a long one. What's happening in John chapter 11? Lazarus, all right? Lazarus, you know the word Lazarus means poor man. That's what the name means, is poor man. Death of Lazarus. Now, a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, and whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters went to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death, for it is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now, if you were standing there and you came to Jesus and said, hey, my brother's dead, or my brother's dying, he's ill, and it looks like he's going to die, and he simply said, well, this illness does not lead to death, first you'd be like, well, okay, Jesus would know, we'll just go back home. But look what he says, for it is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Then you got a real question. Okay, the illness that he's got, Jesus is saying it doesn't lead to death, but it's for the glory of God. And that I'm, of course, speaking of himself, the Son of God, he may be glorified through it. So it's kind of like a little not a conflicting message, but a confusing message. If they heard these words, what is he talking about here? Is he going to die? Well, it says his illness doesn't lead to death, but God's going to be glorified through it. So kind of confusing, at least to people who don't know what Jesus is trying to say. We look at it, of course, 20/20 vision. Now, Jesus loved Martha, and her sister loved Martha. Okay, try that again. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Now, from a human standpoint, you think, okay, well, he said that the illness didn't lead to death, but he was still ill. Why did he not go when he needed to and heal Lazarus of his sickness? God was going to be glorified through it. He had to give that time up for that thing to be accomplished. All right, what was accomplished? What happened to Lazarus? He died. All right, so he waits for 2 days. He waits for his friend to die before he goes to see him. That's again, from a human standpoint, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but Jesus had something greater in mind than simply healing his friend. Here's the thing. He could have healed Lazarus by simply speaking the word where he was, right? He's already done that. He's already healed the centurion's servant. You know, go your way, your servant is already healed. And sure enough, as he's on his way, his servants come to him and say, you know, he had the servant's well. And he realized it was the same time that Jesus spoke those words, his servant was healed. So Jesus could have simply said, Lazarus, be healed, and not even broken stride as he's walking down the street. Oh, Lazarus is sick. Okay, yeah, he's not sick anymore. Just kept going. But he waits. And he's going to be magnified through it by what happens. Then after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and you're going there again? Jesus answered and said, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. After saying these things, he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. Now, again, from the standpoint of those who might be listening, the idea of simply falling asleep and awakening him may have been misconstrued, because that's not what happened to Lazarus. So they're thinking as they're going that they're going to get there and Lazarus is just simply, he's fallen asleep, and he's just going to go wake him up. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover. Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he meant taking rest and sleep. Then, of course, finally he has to drop it and just say, okay, Lazarus has died. And for your sake, I'm glad that I was not there so that you may believe. So, as he said earlier, it's not an illness leading to death. God is going to be glorified, and the Son of God is going to be glorified. All right? So Thomas called the twins, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. Who? Jesus. Remember, the Jews were seeking to stone Jesus. So he says, let's go with him so that we can die with him. You know, remember we're called to discipleship? Unless you're willing to pick up your cross and follow all the way, you're not worthy. I mean, here's Thomas, right? Doubting Thomas. What does Thomas say? Let's go die with him. If we get there, they may kill him, but if you're going to kill him, they'll kill us too. We're willing to die with him. We're going to take that cross up and we're going to follow him to the very hill that he dies on. We're going to go with him. All right, so now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus has already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Mary and Martha to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. So this is kind of a turnabout, isn't it? Where before Mary wanted to hang around Jesus and Martha was doing something else, now Martha goes to Jesus and Mary sticks around behind at the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now, a lot of people look at this as an accusatory. I don't think this is accusatory at all. I think she genuinely meant that, listen, I know you couldn't come, but I know that if you had been here, he would not have died. I think this is a statement of faith on Martha's part rather than, listen, why weren't you here? You should have been here. If you'd been here, he wouldn't have died. I don't see that as this at all, because we don't see this in their nature, these two women or their brother. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that, like this, that's his even greater faith, right? But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. What do you think she's intimating? What is she hinting at? Jesus, if you want it, your Father's going to give it to you. If you say rise up, come out of that grave, you'll come out of that grave. Now let's continue on because it gets a little tricky. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Now she's confused. Now she's not part of the Sadducees, the group of the Sadducees, because they didn't believe in resurrection. But the Pharisees believed in a resurrection. She even says this. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Again, a statement of faith. That's as much a faith as if Jesus had been there, he would heal him, right? I know that he will rise again. The resurrection will come, and my brother will come up out of that grave. I know it's going to happen. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection. Now that gives you a little bit of hope, or gives her a little bit of hope. The resurrection will pull him up out of that grave, and Jesus says, I'm the resurrection. I am the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? Asking for confession, right? This is what it is. Same confession that he asked from Peter, right? Who do you say that I am? So he's asking for the same confession from her. And she said, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God who is coming into the world. I tell you what, every time I read this, it just gives me a chill when I hear these people do this kind of confession, because they're making it in circumstances that they're not completely aware of, but they have a faith that informs their decision to confess it. They haven't seen any of this happen. They've seen what he's done, but they are still, this is a confession of faith. They've never seen him come from heaven. They've never seen him go back to heaven. They've never seen him resurrected, but they confess that he's the Christ. So when she'd said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, the teacher is here and is calling for you. When she heard it, she rose quickly, went to him. Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep. Now, remember, when we speak of, especially in the book of John, when we speak of the Jews, we're not speaking of the common the common hoi polloi of the Jews. The Jews here are the religious leaders. So when he writes about the Jews, he's speaking of these people. All right? And you know that if they were Pharisees, when they came to mourn and they came to do all of this kind of stuff, were they really as concerned about comforting Mary and Martha, or were they more concerned about, here I am? Because that's who they were. They always wanted the best. They always wanted the adulation of the people. They wanted the reverence of the people. So that when they would come, it was almost like, I'm coming, I'm blessing you with my presence. That's their mindset. They weren't seeking to be a help. They were merely seeking to be seen by men. So, when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Same thing as her sister. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And they said, Where have you laid him? And they said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. So the Jews said, See how he loved him? But some of them said, Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying? Well, what was going to be a greater demonstration of God's power? Keeping him from dying or doing what he's about to do? Listen, I have a great deal of respect for doctors, and the fact that they can sometimes keep people from dying because of their knowledge and their skill is just impressive. But you show me a doctor after that sheet's been drawn over somebody's head and they've pronounced them dead, called it time of death such and such, and they go in there and they put their hand on that sheet and that person comes up, that's when you're going to get, anyway, that's going to be big. But that's not what happens. So here they're saying, could not the man who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying? Verse 38, then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, Take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, Did I not tell you that if you believed you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me. So all of this was, again, to confirm who he was. Not merely that he came from God, but that God was his Father. And he had the power to do what he did, and that power came from his Father. When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. Excuse me. Whew. Lazarus, come out. Then the man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, Unbind him and let him go. All right. So now you think, this is, listen, there can be nothing but good come out of this. This is a man who was well loved. He is, even if he didn't heal him from a distance before, or come early and heal him, or heal him from a distance, this man came back and raised his friend from the dead. Surely nothing bad can come from this. There can't be any negative thing come from this. Don't speak too quickly. Verse 45, many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and seen what he did, believed in him. So yes, good came from this. So these religious leaders who had never seen, they saw him heal a man, but now he's raised a man from the dead. Well, no one can do that except for God. No one can do that except for God. So they believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Now, they are tattletales and talebearers and troublemakers. So the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council and said, What are we to do? Now, think about this. He has just demonstrated the power of God. He had demonstrated who he was and who had given him this power, knowing full well that he's forgiven sin, he's healed the sick, and he's raised the dead. What are we to do, for this man performs many signs? Well, they admit that they're signs. What are they signs of? God, the power of God. So they admit these things, but what do they still do? If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. Think about that. This is their mindset. This is how far removed they were away from God. They weren't just slightly off base. They were so completely off base as to not even be in the same ballpark. This is just an appalling development. And it just goes to show how removed they were from the mindset of God. Instead of rejoicing and saying, okay, if obviously God is working through this man to do these signs. He's given him this power. Maybe, just maybe, we ought to listen to what he has to say. It's going to be better, right? They were so worried. Look what he says. They will come and take away both our place and our nation. So they were worried about losing their place. They would not be as important as they once were. Because remember, the whole point of the Pharisees was to try to be as strict adherents to the law as possible for the coming of the Messiah. So here comes the Messiah, so they don't have to do this anymore. They're not willing to give up what they're doing. They're not willing to give up that strict mindset and that placeholding that they were doing in order for the Messiah to come. It's just illogical and short-sighted and foolish. All right, so here's go. But one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish." He did not say this of his own accord, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but also to gather into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. So from that day on, they made plans to put him to death. Impressive. I mean, the mindset of some of these men in opposition to God's plan. That's what's so disturbing about it. It was in such opposition to what Jesus had in mind, what God had in mind for them.
He's done so much good, we have to kill him.
Yeah. We can't let him go on doing these kinds of things. We can't let him go on casting out demons and healing the sick and raising the dead and forgiving sin. This won't stand. You know, it's
It's hard for us to read that and understand how they could think that way.
Yeah.
And yet, a lot of people, while they don't have the power to do what these leaders did, a lot of people still want to see what, or read and hear what was done and still don't want to. They would crucify him again if he would.
If possible, they certainly would. And you'd already have people that would be ready, because they would love certain things that he said. They'd love all the, hey, love one another, that kind of thing. But when he said, hey, listen, not only that, you have to go your way and sin no more. You have to reject the things of this world. There'd be people who would be ready. I mean, they would get down the road good before they try to stone him again. I want to look real quickly, and then we're going to finish up. You go back right here to at verse 49. Caiaphas, he was high priest. Look what he says. He said, "You don't know anything. You don't understand that it's better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish." Now, if we look at it, if he was speaking of his own accord, he would rather have Jesus die so that the Romans will not come in and do this. But look what he's saying. He did not say this of his own accord, but God caused him to prophesy this thing. And this is that Jesus would die for the nation. So you look at it on the surface and you think, well, he's talking about, listen, it'd be better just for Jesus, let's go ahead and kill him so that the Romans don't come in. But that's not what he's saying here. That's not what he's saying here. He's prophesying from God, not of his own, not according to his own understanding and knowledge, but this is God giving this to him to say. So it's kind of a double meaning. See, they are taking it to mean the idea that, hey, listen, rather than the Romans come in and displace us, we need to get rid of this guy. But that's not what he's saying. He's talking about Jesus actually physically dying for the nation so that, not for the nation only, but also to gather into one the children of God. So he's actually speaking about the true purpose of Jesus dying on Calvary, which is to usher in that new era of a relationship, a covenant with God. So it's kind of if you're not careful, the people that were listening to that, it says, so from that day on they made plans to put him to death. But that's not what Caiaphas was prophesying about. He was prophesying about the true nature of Jesus' sacrifice. They just heard, well, it's better, let's just go ahead and kill him so the Romans don't come in and displace us. So, you hear what you want to hear, right? Well, at the end of the day, that had to happen, right? It had to happen. God caused this to happen in such a way. So when he causes this man to prophesy, they're taking it to mean that we need to just get rid of him so that the Romans don't come in. in spite of the fact that God needed this, it had to happen this way in order for Jesus to die as a sacrifice. So, again, God using imperfect and sometimes immoral and evil men to accomplish his purpose. And he certainly did that here. All right, that's it. That's all I've got. My throat's about done. I don't think I can say any more. Anybody got anything you want to add before we close out? All right. We're going to stop there then. 772. Let's stand while we sing 772.
Pray that you'll